Thank you, Can Corla. Apologies, Can Corla Minister. You'll have to be patient. I'm recovering from a bad bout of laryngitis, but I just had to speak on this because this draft regulation is the most profound, the most far-reaching piece of legislation on land use change ever proposed by the European Commission. And even though they don't know it, it will impact every man, woman and child, both rural and urban, in terms of land use, in terms of planning, in terms of infrastructural planning. It will hugely impact on settlement patterns, along with urban, rural and regional development. And the government decided, and I'm sorry to have to say this, that it was worth just 90 words of an amendment with no commitments, completely bland. Now, Minister, I don't often stand up in this House and strongly criticise responses, because while they might be unsatisfactory, at least some of the time some effort is made to address the issues in the motion. But your amendment sidesteps the core issues, avoids the hard questions, glosses over the critical issues that must be answered. And, you know, in plain, old-fashioned, paternalistic political speak, it's basically saying, don't worry, boys and girls, we look after you. Now, Minister, you and I know that won't cut it. Those 90 words don't give any commitments that people want to hear today. Now, Minister, I've listened to many politicians and commentators talk about this proposal and about scaremongering and try to portray people who question the Commission's proposal as not caring about the environment. Minister, we do care, but what we really care is that we have good legislation to underpin the policies. And the Commission proposal was not that. Their aims are good, but while we need to examine is the where, the when, the who and the how. And that's all we're doing here today. Minister, a little bit of context never goes astray. 3 committees in the European Parliament could not agree any common position on this legislation. 2 rejected it outright, and the 3rd was evenly split. So no proposal goes to the plenary in July or September. Now, I spent 15 years in the Parliament, and I never saw that happen to any piece of legislation, let alone an important piece. Even the Services Directive, which was a horrible piece of legislation initially, got some sort of position in the Parliament. So that tells you that this legislation, despite its good intentions, is flawed, and that's being generous. We'll hear cheap shots about the EPP ruling the roost. They have 176 seats out of the 705, less than 25% of the Parliament. So if 3 committees cannot have an agreed position and 2 rejected outright, that tells you that that broadly reflects the view of the Parliament. And while I'm no longer involved in the day-to-day workings of the European Parliament, I'm told this proposal will struggle to get through in any shape or form. It may, but it will struggle, and that's no basis for agreement or any kind of conciliation. Now, Minister, to be fair, the Council of Ministers have made a reasonable effort at reining in the overreach and competence creep of the Commission in this case, and have produced a common position that could form the basis of an agreement. I'm not sure how Ireland contributed. All I heard from our ministers was that they were gung-ho, so I think perhaps we have to thank the Belgians, the Austrians, the Dutch, the Poles, the Finns, the Italians, the Danes and the Swedes for injecting some realism and some perspective into this discussion. And now at least we have reached a point where there is a document with a wafer-thin majority in support. In order to get this through on qualified majority voting in the Council, those in favour had to represent 65% of the population of the EU. In fact, they represent 66.13. So your majority is wafer thin, and that includes Denmark, who only supported this proposal at the end, and they have serious concerns about paying farmers for restoration. And for many countries, including Ireland, I'm led to believe that is an important issue. So my question, Minister, is why is there no mention of recompensing farmers in your 90-word amendment? You've said already it needs to happen. Why no government commitment to it? Why no word of voluntary participation in any schemes? Again, something you have said time and time again. Where is the government commitment to this today? Is there no agreement between government parties on this? Why not? Why didn't you add another 90 words at least and make some definite government commitments, not you, Minister, or another minister, but why couldn't you make government commitments to those whose lives, livelihoods and communities will be most affected? Now, Minister, many people are concentrating on re-wetting the land, and I can see why, because it took generations to drain that land to support farm families. And now the Commission proposal, and to a lesser extent the Council proposal, would see significant tracts of land re-wetted. And as Deputy Fitzmaurice said, what we're looking at here are organic soils, drained organic soils, and we know where they are in the country. They're along the Atlantic coast, northwest, west, southwest, parts of the Midlands and pockets elsewhere. And Minister, you came down to Leitrim. And when you came down that time, and thank you for your work on Shas Mountain, you did good work. But when you came down on your first visit, I pointed out to you the biodiversity that was all around you, because there's extensive farming in most of these areas. Yet, under this proposal, they would be the areas hit first and hardest. So again, we have to ask, is this making sense? Will it deliver? And finally, not quite finally, but the Council position, it's important to say this, is only the position of one of the three legislators. And Minister, why, for example, could you not, in your amendment today, guarantee that all Cuilliche, all Bord na Móna lands will be available for re-wetting when the time comes? Because I don't know about you, Minister, but I won't be here when the time comes for that to happen. And will we hear at that time, oh, look, there are challenges, there are issues? I want to hear the government position. And finally, Minister, I just want to say, while much of this debate is on re-wetting, the major commitments are on restoring habitats and ecosystems. That's where the rubber will hit the road. Because if we look at the definition of restoration in Article 3.3, I haven't time to go through it, but I know you've read it. Good condition in Article 3.4 and favourable reference area in Article 3.5. We see quite strict criteria laid down. This is a regulation. If we link that to Article 4, which we must, because they give us the restoration targets, and 90% of the area of each group of habitat type listed in Annex 1, currently not in good condition, must be restored by then. But crucially, Minister, Article 4.2 is further refined in Article 11.2a. Actually, I wrote it as 12a, my mistake. It should be 11a. But we see that, for example, if you take hill land, which are common land in the part of the country that I represent, largely originally heathlands, we see there could be a legal requirement on a farmer to re-establish from an agricultural ecosystem or grassland back to an Annex 1 heathland. Article 11 is very clear. I haven't time to read it, but it goes through the habitat types and the favourable reference areas, going back as far as 70 years. In other words, not what it is now, what it was 70 years ago, or the Council is talking about historical distribution. Minister, this regulation needs to be totally tightened up. I want to hear the government clearly articulate the Irish position, what they propose to do. You can't guarantee the European position, I know that, but I still don't know what the government position is, and particularly on Articles 3, 4 and 11, as I have spoken of here.